Gail, along with my co-owner over there, Amy. We are the owners of Wonderland Books. If you've been to Wonderland before, welcome back. And if you haven't been to Wonderland yet, welcome to the store. I'm just thrilled to have you tonight. Our speaker tonight is Jeremy Baker. Jeremy grew up in Italy, Florida, and Maryland. He's a former U.S. Army counterintelligence agent and combat veteran. He recently burst onto the crime fiction scene with his debut thriller, The Guilty Sleep, a riveting novel that centers around robbery and betrayal in which a father's love faces off with a soldier's debt. Like the protagonist of the novel, Jeremy served alongside U.S. Special Forces in Afghanistan, and also like the protagonist, he is a PTSD survivor. Over the past 20 years, Jeremy's work in national security has focused on intelligence, counterterrorism, transnational organized crime, human trafficking, climate risk and resilience, and cybersecurity. He lives with his family in Maryland, where he keeps a little garden and writes about the things that keep him up at night. He's here tonight with his daughter, aspiring author Charlotte Baker.
Thank you so much. That was quite an introduction. I don't know who wrote that. It was awesome. Thank you all for being here. Family, friends, former coworkers, surprise, former partners in uniform. It's incredible to have you all here. And those of you who I don't know, I'm sure, thanks for coming. It's great. Special thanks to the team at Wonderland for having us. This is our neighborhood bookshop because we're here often for events that Charlotte has, and we find ourselves in this bookstore every time, and it is just our favorite place. And also special thanks to Charlotte, who agreed to be our interviewer / moderator for the evening. This is very exciting. Charlotte is the best writer I have ever read, so to get to sit with her and have her ask questions that I don't really know exactly what you're going to ask, so this is exciting. You might surprise me. So can everyone hear us okay in the back? All right, good. I think we'll be fine without the mics then. So we'll do some questions, and I think we'll have some time for questions from the group, and I think we'll do a little signing at the end, perhaps. So without further ado, Charlotte, you want to
get started?
Let's do it.
Okay, let me get my questions up here. So first off, my dad is like the best writer alive right now, of all time, and I love him very much, and I'm very excited to be interviewing this very famous celebrity today and asking him questions. So, number one, this book feels very raw and realistic. How have your own personal experiences shaped and enriched the plot of The Guilty Sleep?
That's a really good question. Thank you. Yes, so they always say write what you know. And that doesn't necessarily mean that anything an author writes has to be an autobiography, but there is a lot of my own personal life and experience in this story. As the introduction kind of revealed, the protagonist of the novel and I have some similarities in terms of our military background and our deployment history and some of the things that we struggle with. Fortunately, I've never found myself embroiled in a criminal conspiracy Yeah, day's not over. Day's not over, Todd. That's right. I mean, there's always time for things to go south. But in terms of very real aspects of my life and my experiences in the military or in this book, especially things around a deployment that I had to Afghanistan, where there was an incident that occurred that could have been much worse than it was. Thank goodness it wasn't. And that incident kind of makes up a central part of a flashback of this book, right? Where if you take that incident and then extrapolate it to its nth degree, the worst possible outcome, that's in the book. Some of the protagonists' struggles with PTSD are similar to struggles that I had with PTSD after I got back from Afghanistan. Some of the ways he feels about things are similar to ways that I feel about things. And then also sort of the other side of that coin, other side of the military coin, is the family coin. So our protagonist is married, he has a wife and a daughter that he loves very much. And his wife and my wife share many of the same personality traits and characteristics, their strength, their intelligence, their determination to protect their family no matter what. And his daughter is very similar to my daughter. In the book, she's very young, but perfect example, our character is under some financial distress or duress, and part of that is his daughter needs a surgery to correct a problem with one of her eyes, and she has to wear an eye patch, and that is something that Charlotte experienced when she was very young, and that I also experienced when I was very young. The daughter character in this book also has a heart for sloths, and that is something that I think you also share with that character.
Very much so. That's beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
You're so well spoken.
Oh, thank you. Right back at you.
Your book is a crime thriller. What do you love most about this genre?
Oh, where do I start? As noted in my introduction, I spent the last 20 or so years after my time in the military working in law enforcement, intelligence, homeland security, national security, and working against transnational organized crime. Some of those coworkers are here this evening. It's good to see you. And so I can't tell you how many times I heard about a case that we were working where I'm like, boy, that would be a great TV show, or that would be a great movie, right? So I love the genre of crime thriller because it's just really interesting. There's so many different things that can happen. I'll actually harken back to my Army days, and one of the things they taught us in counterintelligence training is, a lot of what you do is talking to people, right? You're creating sources of information and developing relationships, and you might have a source who's a police officer or a member of the military or a member of a government or something, but a lot of times some of your best sources are actually really bad people, and that's because those people understand what's going on in and around their community. So you get exposed to some really bad characters when you do this type of work. So I've just always kind of loved that genre of storytelling. And I was actually inspired to write this book after finishing a book by a current crime writer named S.A. Cosby, who lives and works in Virginia, who is, I think, the best crime writer working today. And he had written a novel called Blacktop Wasteland, which was his first published novel. And it was crazy popular. President Obama had put it on his reading list for the summer, and I read it and I was brilliant. I was like, I wish I could write something like that.
And now you have.
So thank you.
So you talked about this a little bit earlier, but I just want to kind of dig a little deeper into this. Dex struggles with PTSD in this book. Have you ever struggled with the same condition, well, we know now, in your life? And if so, how is it like writing about it?
Yeah, it's really interesting, actually, because I got back from Afghanistan in 2002, right? So pretty soon into our involvement in Afghanistan, and then there was subsequent U.S. involvement in Iraq, and I didn't really understand what I was going through. I didn't understand why I was angry sometimes for no reason. I didn't understand why I was having trouble sleeping and things like that. And there wasn't a super in-depth amount of attention being paid to it yet by the military as well. So I remember going for a medical appointment after my deployment because I'd been exposed to tuberculosis and I was on this medication, and they're like, how you doing? I'm like, I'm not really sleeping that well. I keep waking up in a cold sweat, and I keep having these very vivid nightmares. And they're like, you should maybe think about talking to someone about that. And that was kind of where it was left. And I was feeling a little bit lost. I didn't really know what to do. But I'd always read a lot, and I was reading a book of short stories, and I was like, I can't, it's another night I'm having trouble sleeping. I'm going to just write. Let's see if I can write a story. So I wrote a story, and it was terrible, but it was that felt good.
I'm sure it wasn't terrible.
I mean, probably should not see the light of day, I think. But what I found was the more I wrote, the better I felt. And it was because I was able to, yeah, that's exactly right. It was cathartic. I could take the things that I was thinking and feeling about, my negative thoughts and emotions, and I could take them and put them in another character, and then have that person deal with those problems or not, but I could look at them from kind of a safe distance. And so writing became therapy for me. And so it just became a habit even after, I no longer struggle with PTSD. I'm very thankful for that. And I think my journey through that was certainly probably an easier path than many others have experienced. Although everyone's journey is different, of course. So I found that I just kept writing even after I was feeling better. And specifically for this book, to circle back to your question, I started writing this in October 2021. The U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan in August of 2021. And I found myself in the aftermath of that withdrawal with a lot of thoughts and feelings and memories of my time there, and talking to a lot of fellow veterans of Afghanistan who also had a lot of thoughts and feelings, and thinking about the question that kept coming up for a lot of the vets I was talking with, and question that kept coming up in my mind is what has this all been for 20 years on? And that was kind of guiding what I was thinking about as I looked back on that time. And it just felt right to write about it in that same sort of way that I would write in a way to deal with my PTSD, sort of on a broader scale. Let's write about Afghanistan and the cost of war on those we ask to fight our wars, and kind of loop it together with this crime story I've been thinking about.
That's really cool. So you put like all your emotions into the book, and that's probably why it feels so like real and like vivid, you know, and like a real experience when you read it.
Thank you.
Dex's wife and daughter play an integral part in this novel. Are they in any way based off of your real family members in real life?
Yeah,
And if
100%.
so, what was it like writing them down as fictional characters?
Oh, it was a little bit scary, because you want to, when you love someone as much as I love you and your mom, and respect who you guys are as people, and you have these characters, you know, he had a wife and daughter, I have a wife and daughter. There was always going to be some sort of bleed over, right, just because of experience. But the more I wrote those characters, the more they kind of took on personality. And I knew from the start that the daughter was going to be inspired by you. And I found myself like, okay, this Dexter's wife, like, she's got to be strong, she's got to be smart, she's got to be independent, she's got to be tough. Oh, that's my wife, right? Like, you know, like more and more of you guys came into the story. So it was a little nerve-wracking, because you want to like pay honor and get it right. But it was also a joy to have such wonderful sort of inspirations for those characters.
Oh, that's so cute. In addition to being an author, you also have a full-time job and have to balance your work life and family life with writing. What are the biggest challenges in balancing all these different aspects of your life while also pursuing your writing goals?
Oh, that's a good question. So family's always got to come first, right? So like writing, I love it. I'm passionate about it. I plan to keep doing it. But unless I was telling Michael earlier, unless you're like Stephen King or James Patterson or Jodi Picoult or one of these folks, they're making a bunch of movies and you've written a million books, like, you know, no one's going to become a millionaire publishing, right? So you can't just like, you write a book and you quit your job, like that doesn't really happen, right?
Sadly.
Unfortunately, yeah. So if you want to keep writing, you have to balance it around those things. And for this book, part of it was written, you know, sort of during the COVID time when there was a lot of work from home, and so you didn't have an hour and a half each way commute sort of eating into your day, so I had a little more disposable time there. But there was a lot of writing in the mornings, you know, in the 4 or 5 o'clock hour before work, on the weekends in this, you know, 5 to 7 o'clock hour or 8 o'clock hour before people were waking up. And for me, once I actually sit down to write, I can write pretty quickly, so that really helped. But it's just a matter of finding the things that maybe take up time that don't need to take up time, and cutting those out. So like, I used to be a big Xbox gamer, and I don't do a lot of that anymore, except for when we go play Left 4 Dead and shoot zombies. Like, that's fun. But I don't play video games mostly anymore. I don't watch a lot of sports anymore, because I want to spend time with my family, and I've got a job, and then, you know, I fit in writing after that wherever I can.
That's really cool. What authors have influenced you in your very specific and very cool writing style?
Oh man, well, so I talked about S.A. Cosby, Sean Cosby, the crime writer from Virginia, who everyone, if you like crime thrillers, buy his latest book. They've got it like on the shelf, King of Ashes, It's supposed to be amazing. Everything else of his I've read has been incredible. And he writes with a real voice and a real place. He is...
Like you.
Thank you. He inspired me to write crime fiction, as I said. So he's fantastic. James Crumley is a writer of sort of neo-noir, private eye fiction, and it's like pretty literary fiction.
That sounds fancy.
And it's amazing. It's amazing. The first line of one of his books, I wish I could quote it because it's about a French. It's about a bulldog named like Abraham Lightning Bottle, like biting someone's foot or something like that. And it's incredibly memorable. So like he's got a great writing style that I really admire as well. And then just from reading at a very young age, people like Stephen King, Dean Koontz. N.K. Jemisin, who is a brilliant science fiction writer. I just admire her work. And so this is kind of like, who would you like to write like if you had the skills and abilities? Because like everyone's down here and like she's kind of like up here in terms of how she's able to, she writes science fiction, but just in terms of how she puts plots together and ideas and her creativity. That's what I would shoot for if I could.
Is it cool to think that like someday kids who want to be writers will like look up to you and want to like copy your writing style?
I mean, that's very, very nice of you to say. Everyone hopes to be perhaps remembered in that way. I think if people read it and like it, I'll be happy. And if that ever happened, I don't know what I would do. I think, my head would explode.
Well, we don't want that because then you couldn't write anymore.
That's a good point.
You have always loved writing, but during the pandemic in 2020, you started to seriously pursue getting an agent and getting your work published. Do you have any tips for authors on getting into the writing business and making their dreams a reality?
Oh, it's really hard. It's really hard. If you're going to do traditional publishing, it's extremely difficult. You can self-publish very easily these days, which is great because there's so many wonderfully written, very interesting self-published books out there. And people now are able to get their stories out very easily. I decided I was going to seek traditional publishing because it was just kind of always a bucket list idea for me, and I was writing a lot during COVID. So it was just almost like a work project in a way, where you kind of research what it takes to become a published author in the traditional publishing field. And it's, well, you have to find an agent first, because you're not going to get a traditional publishing contract most of the time without an agent. Then it was researching, okay, well, literally Googling, how do I get an agent? And there's all kinds of resources in this day and age online. There's a very famous literary agent from New York named Janet Reed, who had represented so many like New York Times bestsellers. And she's passed away now, but she had a blog. And the process of seeking an agent is called querying. You write letters to these agents and you ask for representation. And she had a blog called The Query Shark. She kind of, it's like, I'm a shark, chomp, 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 and she gave sort of very brusque, but not mean, but very clear sort of feedback on, if you're going to write a literary agent requesting representation, this is how you need to summarize your story, right? Or this is how your letter should look, and you should have like one paragraph of an introduction and one paragraph about your story, and people could send her queries that they had written, and she would critique them on her blog and be like, with their permission, right? Like, this is strong, this isn't strong, change that, don't change that, what have you. So I read all of that. And then there's a website called Reddit, which is largely a cesspool, but there are lots of valuable things on there as well. And there was a community of literary agents and editors and authors in one of the channels that talked a lot about how you could get representation, and they would do critiques of people's queries. And so I read a lot of that and submitted some queries through there. And then again, it's just like a work project. I built an Excel spreadsheet. Anyone who's worked with me knows I love an Excel spreadsheet. And of all of the agents, I'm like, you start researching, okay, who's an agent that represents books in this genre or whatever? Okay, this agent at this literary agency, and this agent here, this agent there. Okay, well, who is that agent representing currently? Are they similar to me, or have they represented books like mine in the past? And you do they have any sales, any big sales that they've made to publishing houses? And You kind of decide who you're going to query, and you send off your queries. And if you're lucky, an agent will go, yes, I'd like to represent you, which is fortunately what happened to me. And then I'm going to tell you guys what nobody tells anybody when it comes to publishing, is if you see a debut author like me, my book here, 95% of the time, it's not the first novel anyone's written. Right? That's not my first novel. The first novel I wrote, I still think it's really good, and I still think it should be published someday.
It is.
Thank you. And that was good enough to get a literary agent to go, yes, I want to represent you, and not just for this book, but for anything you write, because I think you're a good writer and you'll be fine. And we almost sold it. It was close, but we ultimately didn't get a publishing deal. And then, so the second novel, oftentimes, or the third, or the seventh, or the 10th is what sells. And then for a lot of folks, what happens is, it happened for S.A. Cosby, who I've talked about a couple times already. He sold his second or third novel, and it did really well. So then they bought his first unpublished novel and then released that subsequently, right? So if there's, back to your original question, which I still haven't answered, is what advice would you have, is if you want to write and you want to be traditionally published, you just have to keep going. It's just like playing baseball. Like, you're going to fail the vast majority of the time that you're hitting, and if you only fail like 30% of the time, you're in the Hall of Fame. It only takes one agent to say yes. It only takes one publisher to say yes. And let me tell you guys, like, it was a long and heartbreaking journey, even with this book. Like, we had interest from an editor who was like, I really want to acquire this. He was a big editor at a big publisher. He's like, can you make this pretty significant change? So we went back and we made the change, and I worked on it for a couple months. And the day before we were going to send it back to that guy, he got fired. And we were like, okay, well, we'll just wait for him to land at a new publishing house and we'll submit to him. No, he's like, I'm hanging it up. I'm going to become a literary agent instead. We had another publisher, a major publisher, that was like, hey, usually, have you heard of this thing called author blurbs, where you get other authors to say nice things about your book, and then we put it on the cover or whatever? If you've got a copy of my book, you've got some blurbs there on the back and on the front. They're like, I know we haven't agreed to a publishing deal, but if you could get some killer blurbs, we think we could give you a publishing deal. So I contacted a bunch of authors, in like New York Times bestsellers, just out of the blue, emailed them, and some of them were really gracious and sent nice blurbs. And then that publisher was like, those blurbs are great, we're gonna pass, right? Like, so things happen, and we were literally ready to give up. And my agent was having coffee with a guy who was an editor at a very large independent publisher called Diversion Books, which is my publisher. And they were primarily a nonfiction publishing house. They specialized mostly in like military nonfiction, or sports, or business. They did like Mark Cuban's last book. They did Tiffany Haddish's last book. And she was like, I know you guys don't really do fiction, but would you be interested in something like this? It's kind of like a lot of the military nonfiction you publish. And he's like, we're actually getting ready to launch a thriller line and a fiction line this summer. Let me take a look. And so it was just a matter of like the right time, the right place, and the agent continuing to work. So it was literally, just didn't give up. So that's the short. Instead of talking for 15 minutes, I could have just said, don't give up, keep going. Yeah, that's the answer.
Yeah, that's really good advice.
Well, and like, so she is, I don't want to embarrass you. She's a writer. She writes, and I've been privileged enough to read her work, which I'm telling you is the best stuff I've ever read. So I can't wait. I can't wait to come here someday and maybe ask you questions. So just don't give up. If you want to publish it, don't give up. Yeah. That's my advice to everybody on this stuff.
Okay, lastly, and this is only if you can disclose this information, this top secret information. Do you have anything planned next after The Guilty Sleep? If so, can you tell us anything about it?
Yeah, so I've got lots of ideas, lots of starts of things written. There is a sequel to The Guilty Sleep that's in the works currently, with some of the, I won't say who, but some of the characters from The Guilty Sleep will be in the sequel. Working title, A Guilty Burn. And then I've got a couple of other thrillers that I'm working on, and I also love genre fiction, science fiction, horror, things like that. So I have some of those things. The problem is never ideas, it's the time to write them, I think is, right? I know, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. It's hard to find time. but
Yes.
you made the most of your time and wrote this amazing book.
Thank you very much.
And I am so privileged to have been able to ask questions with you.
Well, I am so honored that you had such wonderful questions. Thank you for asking them. And for Charlotte.
You want to make you dad?
Any questions from the audience? I think we have time for that, right? Yeah, awesome. The gentleman with the mustache in the back. Yeah. AKA my dad.
Don't worry, I'm not going to tell any childhood stories. I was intrigued right away by the title, The Guilty Sleep. And during the course of the book, you talk about if you have a number of suspects for a crime, that you can tell those who are guilty because they sleep. And the ones that are not guilty don't sleep. Is that something that you learned in military intelligence school, or is that something that you...
That's something that an interrogator told me once upon a time.
Okay.
And then I've read similar stories elsewhere in like nonfiction, like police procedural manuals and things like that, where, and it's not a universal truth, right? Because everyone's different, but it's an indicator. We talked a lot in CI school, Maddie, about indicators, right? If you have somebody who is suspected of a serious crime and you're holding them overnight and they're innocent, they are quite likely to toss and turn and pace because they're terrified that they're gonna be sent away or they're gonna be thought to have done something awful when they didn't, right? And their sense of like righteous anger and like I can't believe I'm being done dirty like this, like the adrenaline flows. And a lot of times when somebody is guilty of the crime, they might still be worried about going down for it, but deep down inside, they know that they're guilty, right? And they're either going to get caught or they're not, but they're in custody, and now it's in the hands of the investigator, the interrogator, the police officer, the public defender, or the U.S. attorney or whatever, and they're not quite as agitated, and they're more likely to sleep. Yeah, great question. My former colleague, Mr. Lestrange. Good to see you, Joe.
Well, Jeremy, it's great to see you too, and it's great to see this side of you with your family. You have a wonderful relationship with your daughter, obviously. I think that's really amazing. I never got to see that side of you at work. But, speaking of at work, serious job. I briefed some of the, intel stuff with you, for a couple of years. Extremely boring stuff, the way we write in intel, right? And then just writing in general government memos, this, that, the other thing. Like, how did you really turn all of that off in order to kind of spark into this like creative side? So I'm a writer too, but I write nonfiction, right? And I wouldn't even know where to start to try and use my imagination and be creative like you have been in this book. So I'm just curious, like how you kind of flip that switch. And
that's a good question, and that's really tough because I honestly don't know. I think some of it is, you write a lot at work, right? I write a lot at work, but I don't write this at work, right? So something about the temporal separation of it, I think perhaps helps, because you go to work and you put on your work mask and your work brain and you do your work stuff, and then you go home and you do your home stuff. I think a lot of it is I read a ton of fiction. And so that keeps that part of my brain, I think, really, really active. And I think the final piece of it is when you write so much of that work stuff, the memos and the policy documents and the intelligence, whatever, right? I get sick of it. And so when I get to write something else, it actually feels fun and refreshing for me. And that's just the way my brain works, I think. Yeah, good question. Thanks for that one. Yeah. In the far back.
First of all, I'm inspired by both of you, so thank you so much for, talking about writing. I want to be a writer, but my question is, in terms of like veterans and healing from PTSD through the arts, I think it's awesome to use that creative, side. And how, I'm curious how common it is, and are there resources or organizations to help, facilitate that, or just a matter of you going out to talk to other veterans about how to heal through the arts?
Yeah, it's a great question. This is an area I'm not an expert on, so my disclaimer is everyone's journey is different, and everyone's journey with PTSD is different. There are folks who have lots of combat deployments and never seem to struggle with PTSD, at least from the outside. There are people who've had one that had some of it. And there's a spectrum right in between. There are groups and organizations that do that kind of work. There was a Desert Storm Marine veteran named Gabe Hudson, who unfortunately passed away from a medical condition just over a year ago. But he did a ton of work in that space and had a podcast, and it was devoted to literary efforts by veterans and things like that. And there are veterans support groups and organizations. I was actually on a call earlier this week with a group called the Veterans Breakfast Club. Ironically, we talked in the evening, but it was a group of veterans from...
It's breakfast somewhere.
It's breakfast somewhere. Exactly. And this was an evening program, but there was a guy on there who had been in Korea all the way up to recent Afghanistan vets, right? So people from age like 99 to 25. And the whole mission of this group, the Veterans Breakfast Club, is that every veteran has a story. Stories are important. Stories can heal. And it wasn't necessarily geared towards you should be writing your stories down, but we should be talking to each other. We should be telling our stories. Again, I'm a college dropout, right? Like, I am not a philosopher. I'm not an academic. But I do believe in art. And I do believe that, I don't know how to say this without sounding like woo-woo esoteric, but like, for me, when I am in the presence of amazing art, or I see amazing art being made, or I read something incredible, or see an amazing painting, we just walked through the Vatican and saw some incredible artwork. Like, you feel like you are seeing something that has almost come through another dimension somehow, and has come through someone's brain or hands or whatever. And if that's true, I don't know how any kind of art can flow through anyone and doesn't leave you changed in some way. But I think there are far smarter and more experienced people than I in that realm. And I don't think I have enough experience or information to really answer your question with the information that it's due, because I think it's a really brilliant question.
The Breakfast Club is a really good answer.
Thanks.
I have two questions.
Yes.
The first one is, did you write when you were young?
Did I write when I was young? A little bit. I always liked telling stories. I was raised in a family where we read or were read to at bedtime.
Right.
I don't want to embarrass my dad because he's here, but one of my earliest book memories is having the Chronicles of Narnia read to me. Mm-hmm. And my dad did the voices, which is like super cool, right? And that's a tradition that I carried on with my daughter, reading the Chronicles of Narnia and The Hobbit. Ironically, Gandalf sounds just like a slightly drunk Sean Connery, at least when I do it. So I loved telling stories. I wrote a little bit maybe when I was young, but just being around books and being around stories all my life. And then when I was really little, we lived in Italy for like 3 years, and we didn't have a television. We had record players and listening to stories on record and stories on tape and stuff. So really having just the power of story as a part of my life from a really young age, I think.
And encouraging parents.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And the second question is, if your protagonist has a wife and a daughter, as you do, did you ask permission from your wife?
That's a great. Did I ask permission? What was that?
He's still alive.
Yeah. Forgiveness, permission.
Well, you did say that there was
That's what the sequel's about,
actually. So I'm curious to know whether you discussed it with
I think I can't remember if I asked permission or we talked about it or what. Do you remember?
Not at all.
No. Yeah, I'm still alive, so I think if I needed to, I probably asked for forgiveness. I think. Yeah, Bill.
Thanks, Jeremy. So what struck me about your writing style is that it's incredibly visual. Very the description is incredibly colorful, like literally colorful, and you could see every scene. Do you experience life like that? Because I should have dressed way better at work. If you did. What is that? that your?
I want everyone to know that Bill always had an impeccable full Windsor knot, like every day.
It was the worst part of the job. Obviously.
You were very well dressed. You know, for me, when I'm writing, yes, I see that as I'm writing, I see it in my mind, which is why for me, sometimes the hardest part of writing is dialogue. Because I don't see dialogue, I hear dialogue. And so my trick there is just thinking a lot about things I've heard people say elsewhere and better than I could say, and then trying to figure out a way to put that in my own words. But yeah, writing for me is very cinematic sometimes, yes. Sir?
Do you start at chapter 1? Have you got it all worked out on a big whiteboard for your characters and the plot? Do you write the climax scene first and work backwards? How does your craft work?
Great question. So there are two schools of thought, right, when you're writing. There's the school of plotting and the school of pantsing. So the plotter writes down, this is what's going to happen in the story. This is the first beat that's going to happen, the first chapter. This is what's going to happen in chapter 2. This is the climax, right? And they might write that from part 1 to the end, or they might start at the back and work their way front, or they might even bounce around. I call that a chaotic plot. Then there's the pantser. Stephen King's a famous pantser. Dean Koontz, I think, is a bit of a pantser, where you're just writing by the seat of your pants. And usually it's people who have really established characters or styles over a long period of time get super comfortable pantsing because they know who their characters are and what they're going to do. So they're very, very comfortable turning them loose into an idea of a world and just kind of seeing what happens. I am stupid. I am a plantser. Which I don't, and so I have an idea of like, okay, this is what the characters are, and this is the trouble they're going to get into, and here's what I think of an outline is working towards, and this is what I think is going to end, and I'll start writing, and then wouldn't you know it, these stinking characters like take on a life of their own, and they start doing stuff that I didn't tell them to do, right? They're like, they start saying stuff I wouldn't have said that. Why'd you tell that guy to, whatever you told him to do? You're going to go fight 4 guys in the parking lot? Like that seems like really like a bad idea. Why would you do that? And then what happens is, so like I usually get like halfway through the book and I'm like, oh crap. And then I've got to go back and start re-outlining, and then I outline as I go for some reason, which doesn't make a lot of sense. So I'm half plotter, and I usually end up with a general idea of where I want to go, and then the guys kind of do some crazy stuff to get there, and then I have to go back and rework it multiple times. 0 out of 10, would not recommend that to anyone. But in this case, it worked a little.
There's no big whiteboard.
There's no big whiteboard, but there are multiple Word documents, MS Word documents, with key plot elements that then like get deleted and shifted around, and every version of the document is like final version 7 final. No, really final.
No spreadsheets.
Yeah, there are Excel spreadsheets sometimes too for character interrelations. And another little thing I do, I listen to music a lot when I write, and then I also reference a lot of music in my writing. And so every story or book I write has a soundtrack also of songs that are either have inspired the writing or are talked about in the writing or I think about as I'm writing. So if you want to see the soundtrack to The Guilty Sleep, you can go to my website, jeremydbaker.com, and there's a link to the YouTube playlist of the soundtrack for this book.
So you gave us a little insight into your self-editing process in your answer to that question. So how much did you self-edit before you felt comfortable to have someone else read it?
Oh gosh, yeah, a lot, and should have done more with this book. So I wrote the whole thing, and actually the actual mechanics, and this kind of goes back to your question a little bit, sir, the actual mechanics of my writing. I always stop writing in the middle of a chapter or a scene or right before something interesting happens. I know what's coming next, but I stop. And that's because the next time I sit down, I have an idea of where I want to go already. But what I do is I don't just sit down and start writing the new stuff. I sit down and I go back to the beginning of what I wrote the last time I wrote, however many words that is, and I edit that. right? You're trying to make every sentence better, choose the right word. What does it feel like? Do people actually talk like this? Is it internally consistent? Whatever. Do that editing up to when I stopped. Then I write the new thing and stop right before something interesting happens. And then the next time I go to write, I come back and I edit that, start writing. So I'm constantly editing as I go. And then when I finish, I go back to the very beginning. I edit the whole thing, usually for like spelling and grammar stuff. But with this book, I did all of that, and then it still wasn't ready. It needed, I sent it off to the agent a little bit early, and she's like, yeah. And then there was a lot more editing to be done. But I also, I have amazing, what they call beta readers, people who read. My mother-in-law, who's here, Diane, my wife, my daughter, my friends. There's a very small group of folks who read stuff before it's ready and provide really valuable advice. So people have this picture of authors, you're just by yourself and you sit down and write. And in a way that's true, because to actually write, you have to do that. But so much of what goes into a book, or at least for me, is talking to people. There's a big bank heist in this book. That's not that's not a spoiler, I don't think. And I planned that heist with a friend, right? Hey, if we were going to rob this bank, how would we do it? That's a fun conversation. I hope the people at the brewery were not listening too hard, or were on a watch list somewhere. I think it was a conversation with you, Charlotte, where you're like, well, what about a stuffed sloth that the daughter can carry around, right? Stuff like that.
Sloths.
It's always about sloths. So writing is definitely for me, somewhat of a community effort. Great question. Any other questions? Yes.
I have to do it. I've been writing a book for 20 years.
All right.
So I've had writer's block for about 20 years.
Isn't that the way?
Do you have any advice as to how you can overcome that?
Gosh, yeah, that's I think that's the toughest subject when writers are talking to each other.
Yes.
Because I don't think there's any one way. For me, if I'm really stuck, I take a walk. I call it plotting and plodding, right? Trying to work out problems, or I'll jump to a different part of the book. I'll jump ahead or I'll jump back. It can be really tough. I think the best writing advice I've ever gotten is you can edit crap and make it better. You can't edit it if it's not there. So even if it's garbage, get something on the paper that moves the story forward in some way. And then even if it's terrible, it's there. Maybe it can be fixed. Maybe it gets trashed. But at least for me, the hardest part of writing is actually starting to write. Even if I've left myself starting at the beginning of an action sequence or something, but just sitting down and just starting is so hard sometimes. So I'll tell myself, okay, just write 100 words. 100 words is 4 or 5 sentences. Right? I'm I can do that. And then next thing you know, it's 3,000 words. But yeah, writer's block is the toughest. Charlotte, have you ever had writer's block? And if so, how do you overcome it?
Why are you asking me the question?
The tables have turned.
I don't know. You write so well. I doubt you've ever struggled with it. So I don't know. Is there anyone else who's written and struggled with writer's block? Have any advice? It's tough.
Yeah.
It's just get something out there and see what happens. I think is and that's terrible advice, but that's all I got.
That.
It's good advice.
I could add to that because I wrote a dissertation.
Yeah.
Yes,
Dr. Lestrange.
Yeah,
it is. Yeah.
It took me 7 years to graduate, by the way. So I significantly had writer's block at different points because I was just so saturated with the material. I didn't even know where I want to start. I think I got some really good advice from a professor once. The important thing is to set a certain amount of time every day and just write, even if it comes out and it's garbage. Even if you throw because when you start,
the habit's important, right?
The habit's important. Putting your words to paper is important. even though you might throw out 20 versions of what you write, but eventually it just, something snaps and it clicks and it starts to come together. And it's also like you're repeating, you know, the story in your mind multiple times, or the point you're trying to make multiple times, and then all of a sudden it just kind of hits you and you're like, oh wait, this is how I want to say it. So I would just say that if you're stuck, force yourself, even if you're writing about squirrels and pigeons that you see out your door, you have to get that sort of creativity part of your mind, you know, unlocked, because life gets in the way, and that's just.
And you have a second PhD nodding in emphatic agreement right in front of him. So you got two PhDs.
I had to write a giant report while working with Jeremy.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry about that one. That was bad.
And I did have writer's block a lot. And for me, I was writing about hurricane recovery, and it was a lot of really emotional stories. And I was supposed to be doing this intellectual analysis. And so I wrote an entire separate document that was all the emotional stories. And that kept me moving when I had to go back and talk about the generators and bridges and stuff. So being able to divert my attention, and I had a practice where I would get up and write 500 words every morning, even if it was just like, God damn it, what the hell is wrong? You know, I mean, I encourage you not to demean yourself while you're doing that, but I mean, it's really important just to get in the habit of putting the words down.
Thanks, Todd. Thanks, Joe. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Peterson.
I was curious, with the feature writer and your daughter Charlotte, how you kind of balance. Obviously, you're a strong writer, but you fought through a lot, and there was a lot of trial tribulations to overcome and whatnot. How do you balance what you want to help her or support her in her writing career if she chooses to do that, but also do you find that there's strength in going through the struggles of that, and so you kind of want her, like it's almost healthy to you have to use that, go through those extra things, or you're probably a better writer now for everything you've done. And so how do if that ever comes up when you're critiquing Charlotte?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I think Charlotte is such a talented writer that honestly, and I'm not even blowing smoke, there's not a lot in terms of craft that I could teach her, right? Like her writing is very strong. I think where I could offer any advice or assistance is just in the mechanics of the publishing industry based on my own experience, which your mileage may vary. And I would give that advice to anybody. I don't know that there's a lot I could offer Charlotte in terms of craft feedback or things like that. Yeah. How are we on time? Is it? Okay.
Good, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions?
Yeah, it's 10, so we can take another question or two, and then.
Yeah. If there are any.
Time you sign some books.
I'm going to. Any other questions? Awesome. Thank you so much for everyone coming out. This has been